Hello, I am Faryal and I am here in Geneva, also known as the City of Peace. And as you can see behind me is the European headquarters of the United Nations. The mood here on the streets, as well as in the highbrow circles of global policy making, is one of caution and concern as the European leaders tried to negotiate a solution to the Middle East conflict, a diplomatic solution to the Middle East conflict. Iranian foreign minister and his European as well as British counterparts, they held talks here in Geneva, which started on Friday. They went through the weekend, but though no breakthrough could be reached as Iran refused to hold talks while under attack. And now, with the US also having attacked Iran, having targeted at least three of its very major nuclear sites, Iran has called it, and continuing basically with those threats, Iran has called it a disruption of diplomacy, a betrayal of the diplomacy and the diplomatic process that was going on here in Geneva. Peace is the spirit of Geneva and is very much the need of the hour as the world hurtles at an alarming rate towards more chaos, conflict, and war. And there in front of me, you can see the Broken Chair Monument, a sculpture which serves as a symbol of peace and a reminder of the impact of conflict and war on nations and natives, the victims of landmines, the cluster munitions, and perhaps now also symbolizing thousands of amputated children in Gaza.
On a New Wave Global, I'm joined by Mr. Victor Willi, who's the co-founder and executive director of Middle East Institute Switzerland here in Geneva. He's an expert on Middle East history, geopolitics, and economics of Middle East and North Africa with over 25 years of professional experience in the region. He's the author of the fourth ODL, A History of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Victor, I'm honored to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm honored myself.
So the situation in the Middle East is escalating with tensions growing between Iran and Israel, and now US also joining Israel's war in a flashpoint moment for the Middle East after the US attacks, following which, by the way, President Trump said that diplomatic talks are still an option for Iran, but as we speak, now, Iran has just launched attacks on US bases in Qatar and Iraq. So, where do you see diplomacy going at this stage when things have already gone from bad to worse? And considering that European Union's efforts at talks this Friday here in Geneva couldn't enable a breakthrough, is there any reason for optimism here onwards?
I mean, the diplomacy and negotiations ultimately are the only solution to any conflict in the long term. The question is whether this will be an option in the short term. We have to say that, Iran always wanted to talk. And I think the Iranian establishment still sees negotiations as the only solution. But of course, it has lost trust that negotiations can lead anywhere, especially if in the middle of negotiations, basically Trump tells them either you do what we say or otherwise we're going to bomb you. And then they're actually going to go and bomb them. So this is not a very encouraging sign for Iranians that negotiations will work. The other one you mentioned in Geneva with the E3, the E3 initiative had no effect from the get-go. It was more like a kind of as far as I can see, it more like a bolstering for the EU specifically Sarkozy, Merz, and von der Leyen, to give themselves some sort of relevance in international diplomacy. I mean, what is clear today is the EU is not really a geopolitical player anymore to speak of in any way. They don't even have a united position on Ukraine, even much less so on Iran. They have divergent national strategies. Sarkozy, who has not much to say anymore internally, needs some sort of foreign policy victory to build his legacy. So he was very guarded and was against the regime change. Merz, of course, came up with this despicable racist comment of the Israelis doing the Drecksarbeit. I mean, one has to be wondering whether he was racist against the Israelis or against the Iranians actually at this point. And Ursula von der Leyen has just simply lost any relevance whatsoever. I don't really know who takes her seriously anymore. So from the EU, not much can be expected. And from the US side, yes, eventually they will return to the negotiating table once they see that the air campaign, or sorry, the military campaign will be ineffective.
Yes, but when you bring peace on the table after the strikes, like President Trump did, and he said now is the time for peace, not realizing that perhaps that can't be determined. You can't do your thing and expect the other country not to retaliate for the sake of diplomatic solutions and peace. I mean, this doesn't really happen this way in real world that we live in. So Trump earlier warned, we know exactly where the supreme leader is hiding, while referring to Iran's Khamenei. What do you think US's next move, now that Iran has retaliated to US attacks on its nuclear sites by targeting US bases hours ago, calling it a mighty and a successful response by the armed forces of Iran to America's aggression? What would the US's next move be in this fast developing situation?
It is very hard to say such a thing in a context where basically the government of the United States is run by a person who changes his mind anyway, in a context where there is really no policy making process anymore to speak of. I mean, a lot of the as you know, a lot of the personnel has been eliminated. A lot of the interagency process between the different departments is not taking place anymore. You have a situation today in the United States government where the lower levels have no idea what the higher levels are going to decide, because there is no policy process. So they're afraid to make any decisions. So everybody is in a little bit of a holding pattern. The other thing you mentioned, Trump's comment. I mean, I think part of that comment was also to play to his base. I mean, we should not forget that the part of the Trump electorate is the MAGA base. The likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matthew Gertz, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon. These guys are hardcore isolationists. They don't want to have any foreign campaigns anywhere. Especially not with Israel, because some of them are anti-Semites. So they are surprised, if not disappointed, that Trump went after Iran, whereas the other side of the Trump electoral base, the kind of John Boltons and the neocons, are ravished that finally Trump went after Iran. That's what they always wanted. But so I would see that comment as also playing to that MAGA base, which can hurt him in the next midterms or the next elections. And how long this campaign will go? I mean, I believe that that Trump personally wants this to be quickly over, so kind of like one strike. But the Israelis, they will want something else. They will want this nuclear program eliminated. They want a regime change in Iran. So they couldn't. So they kind of need the United States to, in Friedrich Merz's words, do the Drecksarbeit for them. Not my words, but they kind of need the Americans to do that. And so now we had this escalation in Iraq and Doha. It remains to be seen whether actually Trump has the stamina to go through with another B-2 bomber campaign, and then maybe another one, and then maybe the Israelis are going to come and say, look, there is another underground base that we forgot about, and now the Iranians moved their nuclear program to that base, and so we need to bomb them again. How long is this going to go? I doubt that Trump will have the stamina to do that for a very long time, also because of the internal backlash. But in this, Hobbesian international environment, it's anybody's guess, really.
Right. But then Trump campaigned on the promise of no more wars as the US embroils in this another Middle Eastern conflict. What would you say of this behavior, which of course is not new to the US, of pushing the world to this edge of war just on intuition, not even trusting his own intelligence? And telling them that she was mistaken, that Iran is not building any nukes, and striking the country on the pretext of possibly preventing it from nuking others, when when Iran is clearly denying that they plan to build nukes. I mean, this type of enforced non-proliferation would perhaps lead to more global nuclear proliferation. What is your take on that?
I think we have to understand all of what you said. I agree, and those are interesting questions. But I think we need to contextualize all of this within the current, international context and the state of the current international system, which is basically one of erosion of international law. This what the Israelis did and the Americans did was a very classical breach of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. And in an intact international system, this would have been, a serious thing. But in this Hobbesian international order that we live today, basically any country can attack any other with impunity. On top of this, you have this context of shifting multipolarity or multipolarities in the plural, the sort of the contestation of the multilateral system of Bretton Woods, by the way, both by the Trump's MAGA America, as well as the global South, as well as a U.S. retrenchment and isolationism. So, all of this is taking place in this sort of like power-based order as opposed to a rule-based order, where you have sort of a lack of normativity, a lack of standards. So also on the epistemological level, we live in this area of post-truth and post-fact, where everything is permissible. So, I mean, your question needs to be understood in the context of that global situation, and it's very hard to say in which direction we're going. But this is really a world of the stronger, where the stronger can act with impunity, and of course this will lead to repercussions, because think about Saudi Arabia or Turkey or any other country with no nuclear weapons, a medium-sized international power. They will all want to get nuclear weapons now. If Iran would have had a nuclear weapon, this would have not happened to them, because they would have a deterrence capability. Can Saudi Arabia or Turkey or Egypt, can they trust the Americans or the Israelis that the same thing will not happen to them also? So I think this will lead to a proliferation of a nuclearization of international politics, which is very, very dangerous, given the fact what nuclear weapons can actually do.
Yeah, so this was basically then about both nuclear, taking away their nuclear capacity as well as regime change, because President Trump has already opened up about regime change goals against Iran, applying his mega rhetoric to the Middle East, saying that if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, just like make America great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? So then regime change, certainly, I mean, they are quite clear about it, that this was one of the goals behind the attack.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think when we talk about regime change, we have to realize that we're talking about Iran, okay? This is not some banana republic with some big boss with a gold watch and a Bugatti driving around this country. And once you take him out, the next guy will come in and you will deal with this guy. Yeah, and also Iran is a branch. Iranian language is a branch of the Indo-European family. There is a very deep civilization there. Iran is the home of Zoroastrian theology, with their dichotomy of good and evil, which has basically taken over in every other religion, world religion. It is the host of a series of great empires: the Achaemenids, the Parthians, the Sassanids, the Safavids, etc. They're not some. This is not some banana republic, where there is just some regime change. If you take out Khamenei, the next guy will come within 24 hours. They will elect a new leader. It is not very likely that once they do that, once you take out Khamenei and they elect a new leader, that this is going to be your peace-loving social democrat who wants to make peace with Israel and is pro-gay rights and pro-women rights. Most likely, this will not be the case. So there is a risk of this being a radical person. And the fact that Iran does not have a nuclear enrichment program, but not military nuclear program, was the supreme leader who halted this program, who never took the step, who never gave the order for this program, for this development to take place. So in a way, he's more or less a moderate. That sounds strange, but he could have also been a Kim Jong.
Relatively speaking, yes, you're right.
Right, and also, Iran has really three regimes, if you will. That's a bit said a bit simplistically, but you have the sort of formal constitutional bureaucratic state. Then layered around this, you have sort of the religious state, and then penetrating all of it, you have the Revolutionary Guard. So there are, in a way, three separate regimes, and any one of them could run the republic by itself. So even if you have some sort of regime change, I mean, it doesn't even make sense, this notion of regime change in the context. The only way you really can have regime change are two ways, in my view. One, you have an internal revolution like you had in 1979, where the regime of the Shah was dismantled and the new regime came in. Or you need a ground invasion, and you need to go in with troops and clear out this stuff and replace that regime, similar to what they had in Iraq. But the case with Iraq is completely different. I mean, the geography is completely different. The average height of Iraq is about 300 meters. The average height of Iran is 1,500 meters. This is a mountainous territory, more alike to Afghanistan than Iraq. It is very, very hard to see anybody, and I haven't heard anybody say something like this, and I'm surprised that I'm even saying this, but if you want to have a regime change, you need a ground invasion, you need an army to go in. And who is going to invade Iran? So how is there going to be a regime change? I don't see that happening in any way.
So Iran has voted to close the Strait of Hormuz following the US strikes. On Sunday, Iran's parliament voted to close the strait, through which around 20% of the world's oil and gas flows. Will a complete blockade be possible? And how do you think that's going to affect countries using the strait for oil trade, including Iran itself, of course? And will it certainly have, I think, an effect on the global oil prices as well, which probably it already is from what I was seeing in the news.
Absolutely. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. If Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, it will also, to a significant extent, affect Iran itself. It will also affect China, because China is oil dependent on Iran. I mean, Iran is the biggest oil exporter or importer into China from the Middle East is Iran. So China has significant stake. That's why also Secretary Rubio has called on China to intervene with Iran to keep the straits open. So definitely the Americans are afraid of this scenario. So this will have a significant disruptive effect on the global economy. This at a time where already the economic situation is weak in many countries, where inflation is high, etc. So this will be an additional strain on the global economy, and it will not be good for anybody. But it is really, it's probably the last option of Iran. I think Iran will try to needle the United States in other places and try to drag out this air campaign in order to make Israel tired, exhaust Israel, because in a way. This also is a campaign of, Iranian missiles versus Israeli interceptors, and Israel spends about 250 million US dollars per day to intercept the Iranian missiles. And Iran probably has not even started to to take out the big guns. Who knows what is buried there underground in these facilities? So the really sophisticated missiles have not even been fired so far. And so Iran is playing a game of attrition. I'm not sure whether the vote in the Iranian parliament will mean anything concretely in terms of, now they're going to execute the order, whether this is just more of a show. But as we have just seen, Iran has many other options, such as Al Udeid Air Base, such as Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. I mean, you name it, all over Yemen. So Iraq has a lot of options still before they are going to this. But definitely it is a scenario, and it will affect the global economy profoundly.
So in fact, my next question was related to what you've just mentioned, that how do you assess Iran's capacity to put up resistance against Israel and the US and sustain that resistance over time? Do you think the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, will come to Iran's assistance if need be, or will Iran remain on its own, just like Gaza? Which might actually, though, of course, lead to an expansion of the conflict with more countries being involved. But at the same time, will Iran be alone and isolated?
When you ask me about Saudi Arabia, will it come to Iran's assistance? I don't see that as very likely, because the Saudis are an ally of the United States. I don't see them now suddenly switch sides and go on the side of Iran. Also, I mean, there is a historical Cold War between. I mean, there are different Cold Wars, but the one I'm referring to is the one between Saudi Arabia and Iran that has been successfully ended thanks to the mediation first of Oman, and then the round that has been closed by China and led to a deal in March 2023. But this was done out of a realization from the part of the Saudis that they saw that they have to, that their security is not guaranteed, right? Remember that in 2019, the Houthis crashed rockets into Saudi oil facilities, as well as to the UAE, and severely disrupted oil production there, and the United States did nothing. So this is when Saudi Arabia realized, okay, wait a minute, maybe we cannot count on the support of the United States any longer. So we cannot we have to find a different strategy with Iran. And therefore, this led to that peace agreement, but which is, as far as I can tell, more of a cold peace at this stage. But from there to now becoming an ally of the Iranians against the United States, against Israel. Don't forget that the core strategic interest of Saudi Arabia is its own security, as well as regime survival, or survival of the legitimacy, I should say, of the House of Saud. So I don't see that now suddenly switching. And with respect to your other question of how long can Iran's capacity to put up resistance against Israel and the United States, as I said before, I think Iran is playing a game of attrition, whereas Israel was hoping for a 6-day war outcome, sort of like a quick and dirty win, and then go back home and have other priorities. This is unlikely to happen. So Iran, time is on the side of Iran, really. And for Israel really cannot win the war, because winning a war in terms of international politics is a function of the specific historical, geographical, geopolitical, strategic, and security conditions of a country, right? And so, the strategic goals of Israel are: one, elimination of Iran's nuclear capabilities; two, regime change; and then you might add as a third goal that of unconditional surrender that was put out by Trump. But the theory of Israeli victory cannot work because they cannot do it alone. So they need the United States. And also for the regime change, this is impossible with simply an air campaign. As I said, you need a ground invasion. And in terms of unconditional surrender, you can bet that Iran will fight until the end. So Israel has no way to win because it has no way to achieve its strategic goals. And even if the centrifuges are destroyed, the Iranians are just going to rebuild them. It will take some time, but they're going to rebuild them, and they're going to pursue a nuclear program. So yeah, I mean, Iran has a lot of tools at its disposal to and they've been doing it very successfully for decades now. They've been really with this Shia crescent, with all their proxies and allies from Iraq to Syria to Lebanon to Yemen, etc. They've been playing a very successful a counterinsurgency strategy, if you will, unconventional warfare. They're very good at this stuff. So, and they're a very old military apparatus, very old state, as I said, very deep civilization. So I wouldn't underestimate the Iranians, and I think that's the problem. That's the problem of hubris of both the Israelis and the United States, and I think they might, look down a pipe.
Hmm. So the Israel and U.S. attacks certainly they are a clear violation of the world order, the UN Charter. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the expansion of this conflict could ignite a fire that no one can control. We know that the UN has not been able to curtail conflicts, whether it was the Ukraine war or what is happening in Gaza for so long. But with the number and the intensity of conflicts rising globally, should the UN be now worried about this helplessness and powerlessness? I mean, which kind of borders on complicity? What should happen? I mean, if even the European Union, like you just mentioned, is not in a position to do much, uh, is there a platform in this world where we can actually that we can actually look up to solve what seems to be going out of control?
I'm afraid that nothing comes to mind. The UN has not been effective for a very long time now. I mean, the last time there was a legitimate war, you can say so, was the Gulf War in 1991, after the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, and then the coalition that went into Iraq. But ever since then, the UN there has been an erosion of international norms, and today we're living really in a jungle, more or less, globally. It is very scary, actually, because we now are only dependent on the rationality or the reasonableness of world leaders, and not all of them are very reasonable and rational people. I mean, there are still some.
Them are not,
Uh,
yeah.
huh?
I would say most of them are not rational. I mean, we do have a lot of rational and good leaders, like you just said.
we do have in the business world, we have great people in the business world. We have great people in NGOs, in academia, etc. We have many
Yeah,
of them, not just in big institutions, and like small schools, teachers, etc. We have great people everywhere. But the people who are controlling,
fulfill.
large amounts of, who have huge responsibility. I mean, some of them are are completely irrational, or they seem to be completely irrational, and that is a very scary situation, to be honest. And I don't know if the Secretary General, there is a sort of also a sort of a certain alarmism. I still believe, for example, that, for example, Iran, at least when it comes to the Iranians, they don't have a interest in a huge escalation. If you look at what has happened, for example, when Qasem Soleimani was assassinated in 2020, they responded, but not before telling the Americans to clear out their bases in Iraq, etc., and making absolutely sure that no U.S. servicemen or women were dying. And then they bombed, sort of as a symbolic gesture. It shows that, they have an interest. They need to respond like they did in Al Udeid now. They need to respond, but I don't think they're not a eschatological, messianistic club of like, for example, the Israeli government, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Those are the dangerous guys. I think those guys are much more dangerous than the decision makers in Iran, which are actually very strategic people, cold thinking, strategic people, and they don't have an interest in completely crazy escalation.
Yeah.
So actually, that's a little bit of a hope, and I hope that also the American, establishment, the American leadership, people like Marco Rubio, etc., are also still reasonable, rational people, and they don't want to see an all-out war and whatever going towards nuclear holocaust and things like this. I mean, nobody's winning out of this. So I think we're not there yet in terms of an all-out escalation. But
Mm.
yes, given the fragility of the international system, given the demise of international norms and normativity, definitely it's a very dangerous day and age we live in today.
It is. And we all realize that the world cannot be dragged into another war, propped up by false pretenses and selective enforcement of nuclear restraint under Israel's overused narrative of existential threat and, the excuse of self-defense, which is perhaps so
Yeah,
overused that it has lost its meaning now. Um,
and,
it just
absolutely.
yeah, it just uses it to attack countries only to be, and of course, be supported by its Western allies. Victor, I thank you for your very valuable insights. We wrap
Thank
this
you.
up with hopes for peace and better sense to prevail. Till next time, Allah Hafiz and goodbye.